Your son tried to take everything from you, the bank clerk said quietly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if even touching it might make the situation more real. I didn't react the way she expected. I didn't gasp. I didn't ask questions. I simply looked at the paper she had turned toward me, my name printed neatly at the top, the account number I had memorized years ago beneath it, and the authorization line waiting for a signature that wasn't mine. Are you sure? I asked, my voice steady, almost detached, as though we were discussing someone else's life. The clerk swallowed and nodded, lowering her voice even further. He came in last week. Said you were no longer able to manage your finances. He had documents. They looked convincing. Convincing. I almost smiled at that word. I reached into my purse, pulling out my reading glasses, taking my time as I placed them carefully on my face. The fluorescent lights above us hummed softly, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else goes quiet. I studied the signature line again. My name was there, but it wasn't written by my hand. It was too smooth, too practiced. Someone had taken the time to learn how I wrote my name. Someone close enough to watch me. Someone patient. My fingers rested lightly on the edge of the paper. For a moment, I let myself remember the last time Daniel had sat across from me at my kitchen table, laughing, telling me not to worry about anything, that he would always take care of me. I remembered the way Ashley had stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder, smiling that polite, careful smile that never quite reached her eyes. I hadn't questioned it then. I had wanted to believe it. Mrs. Collins? The clerk prompted gently. Do you want me to flag the account? We can stop any further action immediately. I looked up at her, really looked at her this time. She was young, maybe early 30s, the kind of person who still believed problems could be solved by doing the right thing quickly enough. I envied that. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. That won't be necessary. Her brows knit together in confusion. But if your son, I understand what he tried to do, I interrupted softly. I just need a moment. She hesitated, then nodded, stepping back to give me space. I picked up the pen resting beside the document. It felt heavier than it should have, or maybe my hand had simply grown weaker over the years. I placed the tip against the paper and paused, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be very clear with myself about what I was doing. This wasn't surrender. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision. I signed my name slowly, deliberately. Each letter formed exactly the way I had written it for decades. When I finished, I set the pen down and slid the paper back toward her. Process it, I said. The clerk blinked, startled. Are you certain? I met her eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. Yes, I said. I'm absolutely certain. Because if my son believed he could take everything from me without me noticing, then the only way to truly see him was to let him think he already had. I left the bank without rushing, the glass doors closing behind me with a soft, ordinary sound that did not match the weight of what had just happened inside. The late afternoon sun felt warmer than it should have, almost out of place against the quiet shift taking place somewhere deep inside me. I walked to my car slowly, my purse resting against my arm, my steps steady, measured, the same way they had always been. Nothing about me looked different, and that was exactly how I wanted it. When I sat behind the wheel, I did not start the engine right away. Instead, I placed both hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead, letting the silence settle. For 72 years, I had trusted the people I loved without question. I had built my life on that trust, brick by brick, memory by memory, believing that the family I raised would never become something I needed to protect myself from. I thought about Daniel as a little boy, the way he used to hold my hand in grocery store aisles, the way he would look up at me as if I had all the answers in the world. That boy had not disappeared overnight. Change like this did not happen suddenly. It grew quietly, in the spaces I had stopped paying attention to. I started the car and drove. Home, the familiar streets passing by like scenes from a life I had already lived. The small white house at the corner, the coffee shop where Daniel used to meet me on Sunday mornings, the park where I once pushed him on the swings until he laughed so hard he could barely breathe. Everything looked the same, only I was different now. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me with its usual stillness. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the scent of lavender from the diffuser in the hallway lingering in the air. I set my purse down on the table and removed my coat, folding it carefully over the chair as I always did. Routine had a way of keeping things steady, even when everything beneath it was shifting. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, taking a slow sip as I looked around the room. The countertops were clean, the curtains drawn just enough to let in the fading light. It was a home I had maintained with quiet consistency, even after my husband passed, even after the visits from Daniel and Ashley became less frequent, shorter, more distracted. I thought about the documents the clerk had mentioned, the ones Daniel had brought in, the confidence it must have taken to stand there and claim that I was no longer capable. I set the glass down gently on the counter. He had not acted alone. I knew that with a certainty that did not need proof. Ashley had always been careful, deliberate in ways Daniel had never been. She did not rush into things. She planned them. The realization did not sting the way I might have expected. It settled instead, quiet and precise, like a final piece sliding into place. I turned and walked toward the hallway, my footsteps soft against the wooden floor. There was something almost calming about seeing things clearly at last. Not comforting, but clarifying. For the first time in a long time, I was not guessing. I was not excusing. I was not hoping for a different explanation. I knew exactly where I stood. And more importantly, I knew exactly what they believed about me. I paused by the window, looking out at the empty street as the sky shifted toward evening. They thought I would not notice. They thought I would not understand. They thought I would be easy to move aside, like something old that no longer had a place. I rested my hand lightly against the glass, my reflection faintly visible in the fading light. I did not feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was something quieter, something far more useful. I felt awake. I did not call Daniel that evening, and that alone was unusual enough to make me notice the silence differently. Normally, by 7 o'clock, I would have checked in, even if it was just a short conversation about his day, about the weather, about nothing important at all. That night, I let the phone sit untouched on the kitchen counter, the screen dark, waiting. Instead, I made myself a simple dinner, grilled chicken and steamed vegetables, the kind of meal I had prepared hundreds of times before. I moved through each step carefully, seasoning, turning, plating, as if nothing had changed. But every small action felt sharper, more deliberate, as though I was paying attention for the first time in years. When I sat down at the table, I did not turn on the television. I ate in silence, listening to the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second marking the distance between what I had believed and what I now knew. Halfway through the meal, my phone finally lit up. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, just as it always had, familiar and steady. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked it up. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice warm, casual, exactly the way it had always sounded. "I was just thinking about you." I almost smiled at that. "That is good timing," I replied, keeping my tone light. "I was just finishing dinner." "Everything okay?" he asked. "You sound different." There was a pause there, brief but noticeable, as if he was listening more closely than usual. I took a sip of water before answering. "I am fine, Daniel. Just a quiet day." "You did not go out, did you?" he asked quickly, too quickly. "I mean, you did not drive anywhere far, right?" I set the glass down slowly, my fingers resting against the cool surface. "No," I said, the words soft and simple. "Why would you ask that?" Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him thinking. "No reason," he said finally, with a small laugh that did not quite land. "Just making sure you were taking it easy. You know, with everything." Everything. He did not specify what that meant, and neither did I. "That is thoughtful of you," I said. "I appreciate it." In the background, I could hear movement, the faint sound of someone else in the room. Ashley. She did not speak, but her presence was there, quiet and watchful, like it always was. "Actually," Daniel continued, his tone shifting slightly, "I wanted to talk to you about something. Just some paperwork. Nothing serious. I might stop by tomorrow, if that is okay." "Paperwork." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle between us. "Of course," I said gently. "You are always welcome." "Great," he replied, relief slipping into his voice a little too easily. "It will not take long. Just a few things to go over." "I understand," I said. "Drive safely." We ended the call shortly after that, the conversation closing as neatly as it had begun. I placed the phone back on the table and sat there for a moment, my hands folded in front of me. He had not asked if I needed anything. He had not mentioned visiting before today. He had gone straight to paperwork. I stood up and carried my plate to the sink, rinsing it under warm water, watching as the steam rose and disappeared into the air. Tomorrow, they would come to me believing everything was already decided. Tomorrow, they would expect cooperation, trust, the same quiet compliance they had always relied on. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly, my reflection faint in the window above the sink. I did not need to guess anymore. I did not need to wonder what they wanted. All I needed to do was let them show me how far they were willing to go. The next morning arrived with a kind of quiet that felt almost deliberate, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I woke before sunrise, not out of habit, but because my mind had already settled into a place that no longer allowed for restless sleep. I made my coffee the same way I always did, measuring the grounds carefully, waiting for the slow drip into the glass pot, the familiar rhythm grounding me in something steady and known. I carried the mug to the dining table and sat down, watching the pale light begin to stretch across the floor. For a moment, I let myself remember how mornings used to feel when my husband was still here, when the house held conversation instead of silence, when decisions like these were not mine alone. Then I set that thought aside, not because it hurt, but because it no longer served me. By the time the clock read 9, I was dressed and ready, my hair brushed neatly, my blouse pressed, every detail in place. I wanted nothing about me to suggest hesitation or confusion. At exactly 9:30, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I did not move right away. I finished the last sip of my coffee, set the cup in the sink, and dried my hands before walking to the door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there with a familiar smile, the one he used when he wanted something to feel easy. Ashley stood just behind him, her posture relaxed, her expression carefully pleasant. "Good morning, Mom," Daniel said, stepping forward to give me a brief hug. It was quick, almost practiced. Ashley followed with a light touch on my arm. "You look well," she said softly. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Come in. I just made coffee." They walked into the living room as if they belonged there, which of course they did. But something about the way Ashley's eyes moved across the space felt different, more observant, more calculating. Daniel sat down first, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped together. Ashley remained standing for a moment, then took a seat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "We do not want to take too much of your time," Daniel began, his tone gentle, almost rehearsed. "We just need to go over a few things. Some paperwork. It is really just about making sure everything is organized for the future." I sat across from them, my hands resting calmly in my lap. "That sounds reasonable," I said. Ashley reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it neatly on the coffee table between us. She opened it with care, sliding a few documents forward. "We have been thinking about what would be best for you," she said, her voice smooth, measured. "Managing finances can become overwhelming, and we want to make sure you are protected." Protected. The word lingered in the air for a moment. Daniel nodded in agreement, his eyes briefly meeting mine before shifting back to the papers. "It is just a standard authorization," he added, "so I can help take care of things for you. Nothing changes unless you want it to." I leaned forward slightly, looking down at the documents without touching them. The formatting was clean, official, the language precise. Someone had taken time to prepare this. I traced the edge of the paper with my eyes, not reading every word, but recognizing enough to understand its intention. I felt Ashley watching me, waiting for hesitation, for confusion, for the smallest sign that I did not fully understand what was in front of me. I lifted my gaze slowly, meeting her eyes first, then Daniel's. "You have both put a lot of thought into this," I said quietly. Daniel exhaled, a small release of tension. "We just want to make things easier for you," he replied. I gave a slight nod, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel natural, not suspicious. Then I reached forward and placed my hand lightly on the folder, not to pull it closer, but simply to acknowledge it. "I see," I said, and in that moment, I realized something with complete clarity. They were not asking for permission. They were expecting agreement. I let my hand rest on the folder for a moment longer before gently pulling it closer, not with urgency, but with the kind of calm attention that made people believe I was simply being careful. The paper slid softly against the glass surface of the table, a quiet sound that seemed louder than it should have been. I opened the folder and began turning the pages one by one, my eyes moving slowly across the lines, not because I needed time to understand, but because I wanted them to believe that I did. The language was formal, structured, filled with phrases designed to sound reassuring while transferring control in ways that were anything but. Authorization, oversight, convenience. Words that softened the truth without changing it. I paused at one of the pages, tilting my head slightly, as if something required clarification. This part here, I said, tapping lightly near the bottom. It allows access to all accounts. Daniel leaned forward. Immediately, eager, ready to explain. Yes, but only so I can help manage things. It is just in case anything comes up. You know, bills, maintenance, anything you might need. His voice carried that familiar tone again, the one meant to smooth concerns before they could fully form. Ashley watched quietly, her gaze steady, her expression composed in a way that suggested she had already anticipated every question I might ask. And it can be changed at any time? I continued, looking up briefly, meeting Daniel's eyes. Of course, he said quickly. Anytime you want. This is just to make things easier. Easier. I nodded slowly, letting that word settle, as if I were considering it carefully. In truth, I was not thinking about the document at all. I was thinking about the years behind us, about the choices I had made without hesitation when it came to him. The tuition checks I had written without ever asking for anything in return. The down payment I had contributed when he bought his first home. The quiet sacrifices that had never needed to be spoken because I believed they were understood. I turned another page, my fingers steady, my movements unhurried. You have always been good with numbers, I said softly, almost as if I were reminding myself. Daniel smiled at that, relieved, encouraged. I learned from you, he replied. I allowed a small, polite smile in return, nothing more. The room felt still, balanced on something neither of them could quite see. Ashley shifted slightly in her seat, her attention sharpening as I reached the final page. This was the one that mattered, the one that would give them what they had come for. I picked up the pen resting beside the folder and held it lightly between my fingers, turning it once, twice, as if considering the weight of the decision. In the reflection of the glass table, I could see all three of us, positioned exactly where we had chosen to be. They leaned forward, expecting. I remained still. You have done a thorough job, I said quietly. Ashley inclined her head, acknowledging the comment without speaking. Daniel exhaled again, a subtle release, as though the outcome had already been decided in his favor. I lowered the pen to the paper and signed my name slowly, carefully, each letter formed with intention. When I finished, I placed the pen down exactly where I had found it and closed the folder with gentle precision. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel reached forward, his hand quick, almost eager, pulling the folder back toward himself. Thank you, Mom, he said, his voice warm, filled with something that sounded like relief. Ashley's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile, the kind that appeared only when everything had gone according to plan. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap once more, my posture relaxed, composed. Of course, I said softly, because sometimes the easiest way to understand how far someone is willing to go is to give them exactly what they think they want. They did not stay long after that, which in itself told me more than anything they had said while sitting in my living room. Daniel gathered the folder carefully, holding it with a kind of quiet satisfaction he did not bother to hide, while Ashley stood beside him, smoothing the front of her coat as if everything had gone exactly as expected. There was no lingering conversation, no offer to stay for coffee, no question about how I had been sleeping or whether I needed anything from the store. The purpose of their visit had been completed, and with it, their attention had already begun to drift elsewhere. At the door, Daniel paused just long enough to give me another brief hug, the same practiced motion as before, light and quick, as though affection had become something measured rather than felt. We will take care of everything from here, he said, his tone reassuring, confident. I nodded once, meeting his eyes with the same calm expression I had held all morning. I am sure you will, I replied. Ashley offered a polite smile, her gaze flicking toward the folder in Daniel's hand before returning to me. You made the right decision, she said softly. I did not answer that. I simply stepped back and let them leave, the door closing gently behind them, sealing the quiet back into the house. For a few seconds, I stood there, my hand resting on the doorknob, listening to the sound of their car starting, then pulling away from the driveway. The engine faded quickly, replaced once again by silence. Only then did I turn and walk back into the living room, my steps unhurried, my breathing steady. Nothing in the room had changed, and yet everything had. I moved to the window and watched the empty street for a moment, not expecting them to return, not expecting anything at all. There was a certain clarity in that. I crossed the room and sat down in the same chair I had occupied earlier, my hands folding neatly in my lap. On the surface, I had given them exactly what they wanted. Access, control, permission. But what they did not see, what they could not have seen, was everything that had already been set in motion before they arrived. The visit to the bank had not ended with a signature. It had only begun there. I thought about the clerk's hesitation, the quiet warning in her voice, the way she had looked at me as if she understood more than she was allowed to say. I had listened carefully, not just to her words, but to what existed beneath them. Policies, safeguards, processes designed for situations exactly like this, though rarely spoken about openly. I reached into the side drawer of the small table beside me and pulled out a thin envelope, placing it on my lap. Inside were copies, confirmations, and one document in particular that mattered more than all the others combined. I had signed something at the bank, yes, but not what they believed. Not entirely. I opened the envelope and looked down at the page, my eyes moving over the lines with quiet certainty. There are different kinds of signatures, I had learned. Some give things away. Others take them back. I slid the paper back into the envelope and set it aside, my movements calm, deliberate. They would not notice immediately. People rarely do when they believe they have already won. They would go to the bank soon, perhaps even today, expecting everything to be waiting for them, neatly transferred, easily accessible. They would walk in with confidence, with certainty, with the assumption that control had already shifted into their hands. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my gaze resting on the space where they had been sitting not long ago. I did not feel anger. I did not feel regret. What I felt was something far quieter, far more precise. I felt prepared, because for the first time in a very long time, I was not reacting to what my family had done. I was deciding what would happen next. The call came sooner than I expected, though not sooner than I had prepared for. It was just past noon when my phone rang, Daniel's name appearing on the screen again. But this time there was no warmth in the timing, no casual pretense. I let it ring twice before answering, giving myself those few seconds to settle into the calm I had chosen to keep. "Mom," he said, and this time his voice was different, tighter, controlled in a way that suggested something underneath it was already unraveling. "Did you go back to the bank after we left?" I walked slowly toward the kitchen as he spoke, my hand brushing lightly against the edge of the counter, grounding myself in something steady. "I have been home all morning," I replied evenly. "Why do you ask?" There was a pause, sharper than before, followed by a breath he did not quite manage to hide. "There is a problem," he said. "They are saying the account is restricted, that nothing can be accessed without additional verification." I poured myself a glass of water, listening to the quiet splash as it filled. "That sounds like a precaution," I said. "Banks are careful with these things." "No," he said quickly, the words slipping out with more urgency than he intended. "It is not just a precaution. They flagged everything, even the authorization. They said it is under review." I leaned against the counter, holding the glass in my hand, but not drinking. "That is interesting," I said softly. "Did they explain why?" Another pause, longer this time. I could almost see him standing there, trying to piece together something that no longer fit the way he expected. "They mentioned something about conflicting documentation," he said finally. "Something filed this morning." "Mom, did you sign anything else?" I allowed the silence to stretch just enough to feel natural, not evasive. "I signed what I believed was necessary," I answered. That was true, just not in the way he meant. In the background, I heard Ashley's voice, low but urgent, asking something I could not fully make out. Daniel responded to her in a whisper, his tone tense, controlled, the kind of control that only appears when it is already slipping. "We will figure this out," he said, returning to me, trying to recover the steadiness he had earlier. "It is probably just a misunderstanding." "I am sure it is," I replied. "These things usually are." I set the glass down gently, my fingers resting against the cool surface of the counter. "You should speak with the bank directly. They will have the most accurate information." "We are here now," he said, and that explained everything. The urgency, the shift in his voice. They are asking for you to come in. To confirm everything in person. I looked toward the window, the afternoon light now brighter, clearer, illuminating the room in a way that left no shadows to hide in. I see, I said. And what exactly are they asking me to confirm? He hesitated, and in that hesitation was the first real crack. That you authorized the changes, he said. All of them. I let out a slow breath, not of frustration, not of surprise, but of quiet understanding. Then I suppose I should come in, I said. It would be best to make sure everything is clear. Yes, he said quickly. Yes, that would help. I could hear the relief again, but it was thinner now, less certain. We will wait for you. Of course, I replied. I would not want to keep you waiting. When the call ended, I stood there for a moment, the silence returning once again, but it felt different now. Not empty, not uncertain, just still. I reached for my keys, picking them up from the table where I had placed them earlier that morning, and walked toward the door. They were waiting for answers. What they did not yet understand was that the answers they were about to receive had nothing to do with what they expected to hear. I arrived at the bank 10 minutes later than I told them I would, not because I was delayed, but because I understood the value of making people wait when they were already uncertain. The glass doors opened with the same quiet sound as before, and for a brief moment, everything looked exactly as it had earlier that day. The same counters, the same polished floors, the same soft murmur of conversations. But the atmosphere had shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like a room that knows something before anyone says it out loud. Daniel and Ashley were standing near the front desk, their posture different now, less relaxed, more alert. Daniel turned the moment he saw me, relief flashing across his face before something else replaced it, something tighter, more controlled. Ashley did not move at first. She watched me approach, her expression composed, but her eyes sharper than before, measuring. Mom, Daniel said, stepping forward. Thank you for coming. I nodded once, offering a small, polite smile. Of course, I replied. I thought it would be best to clear things up. The clerk from earlier was there, standing just behind the counter, and when her eyes met mine, there was a brief flicker of recognition, followed by something that looked almost like reassurance. She gestured gently toward a side office. If you would all come with me, she said. We followed her in silence, the door closing softly behind us, sealing us into a smaller, quieter space. The room was simple, a desk, for chairs, a computer screen angled slightly away. Controlled. Contained. Daniel took a seat immediately, leaning forward, his hands already clasped together, while Ashley sat beside him, her posture straight, composed, her attention fixed entirely on me. I chose the chair across from them, placing my purse neatly on my lap, my movements unhurried. The clerk remained standing for a moment, then sat behind the desk, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. We just need to confirm a few details, she began, her tone professional, steady. Mrs. Collins, earlier today there were multiple documents submitted regarding your accounts. Some of them conflict with each other, and we need to verify your intentions directly. I inclined my head slightly. That makes sense, I said. Daniel exhaled quietly, as if this was already moving in the direction he wanted. It is just a misunderstanding, he added quickly. We were trying to help organize things, and I think something got mixed up. Ashley remained silent, but I could see the tension in the way her hands rested together, fingers interlaced a little too tightly. The clerk nodded, then turned her attention fully to me. Mrs. Collins, can you confirm whether you authorized your son to take control of your accounts? The question settled in the room, simple, direct, leaving no space for interpretation. I looked at Daniel first. His eyes held mine, steady, expectant, as though the answer had already been agreed upon. Then I looked at Ashley. She did not blink. She did not smile. She simply waited. I let a moment pass, not long enough to feel dramatic, just long enough to feel real. Then I shifted my gaze back to the clerk. I authorized a review, I said calmly. Nothing more. The words landed softly, but their effect was immediate. Daniel's expression changed first, the certainty slipping just enough to reveal confusion beneath it. Mom, he said, a slight edge entering his voice. That is not what we discussed. I turned to him slowly, my expression unchanged. That is exactly what I agreed to, I replied. Ashley leaned forward slightly now, her composure tightening. Margaret, she said, her voice smooth but firmer than before. You signed the documents. We went through everything together. I nodded once. Yes, I said. I signed what I intended to sign. The clerk glanced at her screen, then back at me, her posture becoming more certain. There is also a secondary authorization filed this morning, she said carefully. It places a restriction on all account activity unless confirmed in person by you, and it voids any prior requests that do not meet that condition. Silence followed, heavier this time, settling into the space between us. Daniel's hands loosened, then tightened again, his composure shifting in ways he could no longer fully control. What does that mean? He asked, his voice lower now. The clerk met his gaze briefly, then returned her attention to me. It means, she said, that nothing can be transferred, closed, or accessed without Mrs. Collins explicitly approving it here, in person. I folded my hands lightly in my lap, my posture unchanged, my voice quiet. That is correct. Ashley's eyes moved to me again, searching now, not calculating. For the first time, she did not seem entirely certain of what she was looking at. And that was when I knew they were beginning to understand. No one spoke for a moment after the clerk finished explaining, and in that silence, something shifted in a way that could not be undone. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and calculation, as if he were trying to find a version of events that still worked in his favor. Ashley remained still, but the confidence she had carried into the room had thinned, replaced by something sharper, more cautious. I watched them both without urgency, without pressure, simply allowing the truth to exist in the space between us. So nothing can be done today? Daniel asked finally, his voice measured, but no longer steady. The clerk shook her head gently. Not without Mrs. Collins confirming each action directly, she replied. And at this time, she has not authorized any transfers or closures. I nodded once, as if confirming something already understood. That is correct, I said quietly. Daniel turned toward me then, fully this time, his composure slipping just enough to reveal the frustration beneath it. Mom, I do not understand, he said. You signed the papers. We went through everything. Why would you do this? I held his gaze, not with anger, not with accusation, but with a calm that no longer needed to explain itself. I did exactly what I needed to do, I answered. Ashley shifted forward slightly, her voice softer now, but more direct. Margaret, this is not necessary, she said. We are trying to help you. Managing everything alone is not easy, and we thought it would be better if Daniel handled things for you. I listened to her words, noting the careful phrasing, the attempt to return control through reassurance rather than pressure. It might have worked before. It did not work now. I have managed my life for many years, I replied. I believe I can continue to do so. The clerk remained quiet, her presence steady, neutral, allowing the conversation to unfold without interference. Daniel let out a breath, his patience thinning. This is not about whether you can, he said. It is about what makes sense. We are family. We should be able to trust each other. I considered that for a moment, not because I needed to, but because I wanted him to hear the answer clearly. Yes, I said. We should. The simplicity of that response seemed to unsettle him more than anything else I had said. Ashley's eyes moved between us, searching for an opening that was no longer there. Then why make this difficult? She asked, her voice still controlled, but no longer as smooth as before. I looked at her, really looked at her, not with judgment, but with clarity. I am not making anything difficult, I said. I am making it clear. Another silence followed, heavier this time, settling into something final. Daniel looked down briefly, then back at me, as if hoping to find something familiar in my expression, something he could still rely on. He did not find it. So what happens now? He asked. I folded my hands gently, my posture unchanged, my voice quiet but certain. Now, I said, everything stays exactly where it is, until I decide otherwise. The clerk nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the decision, then turned her attention back to her screen, the matter, for her, already resolved. Ashley leaned back slowly, her composure returning, but altered, no longer confident, only controlled. Daniel did not speak again. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain. After a moment, I stood up, smoothing the front of my blouse, my movements calm, deliberate. Thank you for your time, I said to the clerk. She gave a small, respectful nod. I turned toward the door, aware of Daniel and Ashley behind me, but no longer defined by their expectations. I paused just long enough to look back at them, not to confront, not to accuse, but simply to be understood. You did not lose access to my money, I said quietly. You lost access to my trust. Then I walked out, leaving them in a room where, for the first time, they no longer knew what would happen next.